Okay. But my name is Frank. I'm the president of the Asian American Journalists Association's New York chapter. I know a lot of folks may not be members of the Asian American Journalists Association or its New York chapter. So I wanted just to take a quick second to kind of tell you guys a little bit about AAJ, as we call it. So we are a nonprofit educational and professional organization with more than 1,500 members across the United States, as well as Asia. We have a very big Asia chapter, as well as 20 other chapters in the United States, including the New York one. So the New York chapter, the one that we are in, it's the biggest chapter in AAJ with more than 370 members. And our mission is to advance the representation of Asian American and Pacific Islanders in newsrooms, as well as in the fair and accurate coverage of AAPI issues. So if you believe in that mission, we'd love to have you join us, okay? And we'll definitely send you that link to a join if you'd like, okay, after this. As for today, we're incredibly lucky to be able to hear directly from the Wall Street Journal, one of the largest news organizations in the world, and how they've been able to salvage their distinguished internship program this year despite the pandemic and so much uncertainty this year, okay? And I know that there are a lot of students in attendance today. We saw a lot of EDU, email addresses, RSVP. I know many internships were canceled this summer, and I truly am sorry, and I think everybody in AAJ and on the board is really sorry to hear that. It's been a really difficult year for newsrooms just in general. I know there's more news of layoffs today, and I'm sure there's more coming down the pipeline, unfortunately. But I do hope tonight's panel will bring some optimism, as well as to you, as well as to any internship coordinators in attendance. If a newsroom had to cancel their program this summer, I'm really sorry about that. So we hope you'll take away a lot of things from this, and give you hope that this grand experiment will hopefully work in your newsroom as well, okay? So a quick rundown of the outline today. Part one, we'll have Sarah and Andres talk about how they put together the remote internship program and how they onboarded this year's summer class. You see everybody, this Brady Bunch screen you're looking at right now, this is everybody that's gonna talk about today. We're gonna kind of switch them in and out as we go along. So this is gonna be 3 parts. The first part, we're gonna have the editors talk. The second part, we're gonna hear from the summer interns themselves and hear what they've been learning about working in a remote newsroom. Very interesting stuff, right? And then part 3, we'll bring everybody back, everybody in this Brady Bunch square to talk about, to answer your questions. And one quick thing, kind of the ground rules for today, please ask questions throughout, but we won't answer them until part 3. So there's a couple ways to ask questions. I mentioned this, some folks that attended earlier. You could drop it in the chat. I will monitor the chat. You can DM it to me, Frank B, okay? Or you can use the Q&A feature, and you can upvote on the Q&A feature as well. We'll get to all those questions in part 3, okay? So with that said, I'm going to pass it over to Liz, and she's going to get us started. And then for the interns who are on standby for part 2, I'm going to drop you down to attendees, and we'll bring you back for part 2. Okay, so take it away, Liz.
Hello, everybody. And hats off to Frank. He's the director of this show and will be working behind the scenes to make sure we all get on stage and off smoothly and without tripping. I'm the national board rep for the New York chapter of AAJA and on the national governing board representing at-large members who may not belong to, who don't live near large chapter cities. I'm also a publishing editor on the editing desk at the Wall Street Journal. I want to welcome Sarah Rabel, assistant managing editor for talent, and Andres Martinez, the senior editor for internships, who will share how they got this summer's Wall Street Journal remote internships off the ground. I'll start with Sarah. You received 7,000 applications, chose 30 interns. Andres hadn't yet come on board. When did you recognize trouble and the need to pivot and fast? Was there ever a question that this would happen at all?
Hard to remember early March at this point. You know, so right, we were all dealing with this day by day with the pandemic and starting to understand the realities of it. And I think it was probably the first week I was working remotely, maybe the second week, that I sent a note to the interns that said, this is crazy. I know a lot of schools have sent you home right now. Reach out. I want to talk to you. We're trying to figure out what to do and how to navigate this, and I'll be in touch. Right. So I just wanted to reassure them that we were doing everything we could to try to salvage the experience. But at that point, it was hard to know. Were we going to be back in a couple of weeks? Were we going to be back in 4 weeks? We just didn't even know. And at the same time, behind the scenes, I'm desperately trying to get Andres on board, right? I think, Andres, you had accepted just before we went work from home, right?
Yeah, it's about right. I think March 20-something was my last day at Bloomberg, and we were already in lockdown in New York. So like a lot of you, I'm onboarding, starting a new job during this whole process, and I've never actually been to the Wall Street Journal office.
You came in for the interview.
I did. That's true.
The formal interview you came in for. But yeah, so it's, you know, I was super lucky to have Andres coming on to help with the intern program when he did. And I think it would have been really tough for me to make that decision that we could move forward with it without his help, because he's been so instrumental in working closely with the interns. But yeah, look, there was a moment when we were like, should we do this? Can we do this? We want to make sure it's a valuable experience and that we could make it worth everyone's time. And that included not just the interns, but also the managers. And they were all dealing with their lives being turned upside down at the same moment. And so it was really important for me that at the outset, we worked closely with our corporate partners, HR, finance, but then also like talking to each individual manager of an intern and saying like, can you handle an intern remotely if we decide to do this? And if not, we pivoted, and we have, you know, a couple interns that switched teams just to make sure we could ensure a good experience while they were working remotely. So yeah, it was questionable for a little while, but it was really, really important. And I appreciate the senior leadership team of the Journal for supporting it and saying, if you can figure out a way to make it work, we stand behind it. And we think it's critical to the education of that next generation of journalists that we figure out a way to keep it going.
What were necessary things, adjustments you had to make, and things you just could not do as you went remote? For instance, you originally had 30 interns for the summer and you had to cap it at 8. What are the differences between this first remote program and internships of the past? And how are the remaining 22 interns being spread out?
Yeah, so I'll start on that, Andres, and then I want you to chime in too. We made sure to have an individual conversation with each intern, right? So my team spoke to each one individually. We had a group call to talk about the circumstances and that they were going to be given options. You know, they understood if a team couldn't handle a remote intern, they understood there were options to defer. So we have interns were given the option to defer to September, to January, to the following summer if they still had another year of school. And it was, you know, some of them deferred with the hope that they could be in person and, you know, knowing that that was a roll of the dice, depending on what their situations were. And it was just, you know, we had to really work through that and figure out what was right for each of them. And so it wasn't necessarily like a cap on having just 8, but it was, I think, important that you know, Andres and I have talked about this before. If it had been all 30 this summer, I think it would have been tricky, because we are trying to check in a whole lot more and do a lot more hand-holding, just to make sure, not hand-holding, but just to make sure that everyone feels connected to the journal. They feel like they have someone to go to. They feel like they have faces behind, you know, what they're working on. And so, you know, if I think about like what we had to change, there's sort of like 3 key pillars to the internship program. There's, you know, the work experience, which is absolutely critical. There is the training experience, which I would say is equally as important. And Brent Jones and Till Jaldrup run that for us at the Wall Street Journal. And fortunately, they had already pivoted our entire new hire orientation to being fully virtual. Andres went through orientation fully virtual. And so I think it helped that he went through that experience and then could also help the interns go through that. And so I think it was what, 7 or 8 days, 2 to 3 hours a day of training, just to really get them into the culture of the journal, how we do things. And then the third piece of it that I'll mention is the mentorship aspect. And so we make sure every intern has a mentor that's from a separate group, sort of a safe sounding board, a place to go to for advice, and just someone outside of the day-to-day work. And we asked for volunteers from the newsroom to participate as mentors, because I think it's really important that they wanted to do it. And I think we have Mike Miller on the call who will be joining with the interns. And he's one of the senior most editors in our newsroom, an incredibly veteran journalist with a ton of work to do on a day-to-day basis. And he raised his hand and said, I would love to help. And he's been an invaluable mentor. And so we really appreciate those folks around the newsroom that stepped up, because this wouldn't work if the whole newsroom wasn't invested in making it a success.
And Andres, what in your own remote onboarding informed you with regard to how to steer the remote internships?
Thanks. So just to emphasize a little bit about what Sarah was talking about, this whole aspect of sort of the support from the newsroom, you know, people come and they apply for jobs at the Wall Street Journal because they want to be in a storied, you know, and the most important newsroom in the country. They want to be part of that during the summer. And so for them to offer the internship as a remote offering, you know, we had to make sure that we were supporting them fully. And so not only people like Mike volunteering, but the response from the newsroom in general has been the outpouring of how can we help? How can we get the interns involved in projects? How can we get them involved in, you know, more day-to-day things, even all the social things, you know, happy hours, this, that, has been probably a lot louder and generous than it would have been if they had been in the newsroom. And there are a lot of things to think about when you're sort of designing an internship program, and we're learning. You know, I've referred to it many times as an experiment, and I really do mean that. We're learning, and we're trying to take as much input and feedback as possible. But you know, there's a way to look at it, which is to say this is a challenge, and then there's a way to look at it to say this is truly an opportunity for the interns to speak up, learn a little bit more about themselves, grow as, you know, individuals and adults, not just professionals. And we'll talk about that later, you know, about taking feedback, asking for feedback, that kind of thing. But, you know, things I learned early on, you know, coming on April 6th, I think, to the Journal, knowing a few people, but all remotely, being locked in my apartment in Brooklyn, you know, little things, right? Try to make as much contact, try to make it as regular as possible. It does require a lot of effort. So, you know, every week I try to at least meet with 2 new people, whether it's other editors, other reporters, you know, set that up for yourself. I think the interns do it as well. And I'm always amazed when I hear from someone, oh yeah, this intern reached out this week and that intern reached out. It goes, you know, a long way. And I think unlike probably in-person meetings, there's a lot less space for sort of filler. Everyone is busy. Everyone is prioritizing their time. You know, I tell interns and young journalists this all the time. You know, they need to know what their story is when they're looking for jobs, who they are, what their skills are. And when they go to people, whether it's trying to have a coffee, whether it's, you know, trying to talk to a recruiter somewhere, this whole idea that they take information, right? That it's not this one-sided conversation. It could be simply, hey, you know, I've read some of your work, or I've read something that's going on at your news organization, or hey, we have a similar interest. That really, you know, makes a big difference, and it helps you sort of connect with people that, again, you're not going to be in the same office with.
What were your top priorities as you hit the ground running? What are you constantly finding yourself calibrating as you build the plane while flying it? What are your gauges? And how are those informing you as you prepare your fall internships?
Yeah, so look, I mean, our interns in the fall will start the week after Labor Day. And, you know, one of the things we've learned is, one, moving the mentor program over to sort of more of an idea of having sort of a sounding board for the interns, not so much for feedback towards the managers and myself, but really using it as these are people you can trust and you can go to, and they are your advocates. That has been incredibly useful because it sort of takes the pressure off the mentors to be collecting notes for us, right? And then I, you know, have more time now because the class is smaller to really interact on a daily basis. I mean, if I'd been in person and there were 30 interns, it could totally be done. You know, you're just moving around the newsroom all day long, you're talking to people, you're getting feedback, that's all great. But remotely, we know that would have been incredibly difficult. And so part of that experiment is, I think, recognizing that if you do want to do this, you do have to tailor it so that it's beneficial, right? Because we're only doing this because we thought we could do it and the students would excel. And they are excelling, and you can see it in the work that they're producing. But that can only be done if, again, we tailor that, you know, that effort and that time to them and create space for them. So one key thing was the mentorship. You really need to create it as a safe space for the young journalists to go to. And two, you know, I think one thing that will push for even more with the September class is this idea that, you know, as an individual, as a young journalist, you have to push for feedback. You have to look for it. You have to almost crave it. You know, it's a lot easier when you're in the newsroom and the boss can just look over at you and sort of say, look, you did a great job, or hey, you need to work on this. It's just so much easier. You can send signals, you can sort of, you know, drop a little note here. You, as the young journalist, have to make that effort, and it has to be regular. And I think that's how people grow. And we've seen, you know, again, these 8 students have done an amazing, amazing job, and they've adjusted. They're in their 5th or 6th week, and they've all been fine-tuned, adjusted, heading in the right direction. That is rare. It's hard.
Can I key off that for a second, Liz?
Yes,
Because I think
please.
it also helps address Richard's question a little bit too in the chat about like how to recreate that virtual newsroom environment. And I think Andres was really good about reminding me of this, especially as he was starting remotely, which is not what we thought the situation was going to be when he agreed to join, is that you have to see the opportunities in it. There are plenty of challenges, and we could just absolutely obsess over those all day long. But there are actually real opportunities, and I think about it too because we onboarded a lot of people remotely, not just interns, but what are the ways that we can actually bring more people to the table in decisions, bring more voices into the room? And I think one of the things that Andres coordinated that I think has been really great is that the interns are invited to the morning news meeting every single day. And typically in a given summer, I might take a group of them once or twice, because it's a little bit harder and it has felt a little bit more exclusive perhaps in the past. But I think making that really accessible and bringing them to the table. And so, the interns have gotten the opportunity to see that decision making live every single morning if they want to join. And I think seeing that as an opportunity was a really great way to frame it, because it made us think about what is that experience a little bit differently. And I think too, I've tried to keep my ear to the ground, as has Andres, about where are the other needs in the newsroom. There is so much happening right now. So much happening, and we're not hiring as much as we had been in the past. And so we've got folks redeployed on COVID coverage. We have more redeployed on protest coverage and coverage of race in America and diversity issues. And it's a great opportunity for the interns to also see things and pitch and work across departments. And so not just to stay in the silo as well. And I think there's some great examples of that work that they've been doing. And also, some of them are working on a project with the investigations team right now because they needed more help. And it was like, we have these wonderful reporters right here, lean on them. And so I think we've tried to reposition it as opportunities, and that also helps them meet a lot more people around the newsroom. And I think that inevitably helps people feel a little more connected virtually.
And you have interns mostly on the East Coast, but also in the Midwest and on the West Coast, and also in Paris. How do you work with interns not in the same building, but across several time zones? This will, of course, be a huge issue in the fall as students are far flung from their campuses. How do you build relationships?
So look, it's a challenge, but again, flip that on its head. Now that the program has been spread out, at least for this year, has been spread out across, let's say, a couple of 10-week periods, it means I have an opportunity to actually build deeper relationships, to talk about some of their interests, where, and dedicate that time for it not to be a 5-minute conversation every week. And so we built in, at least half an hour for the mentors, for each mentor and intern, at least half an hour for myself each week, at least half an hour for myself and each intern each week. And then the managers as well. That is something that would have been a lot harder if all 30 had been mostly in New York at the same time. The time zones is actually sort of a bit of a blessing because I can spread the day out and I don't have to have this concentration where, 20 some people are all working mostly for this sort of deadline or timelines. So, Benoit in Paris, he's a night owl, so we can talk as late as possible and it's fine. Urim seems to always be up very early, so that's not a problem. We always, sneak time in. And then, again, you have to set things up. The Slack channels, just make sure it's set there. It's permanent. They know it's there. I try as often, and I probably should be doing better. Hopefully I will get better. Dropping in really great stories they should be reading, whether it's from us at the Journal or at other publications. I've slacked off by the last week. I need to do a better job, and I will. But just reminding them, hey, this is what's going on. We are, one of the preeminent publications in America, not only for business news. These are some of the stories that we're breaking. This is some of the great data work we're doing. This is some great analysis. This is what you can be aspiring to during your internship. And so you want to start that conversation, right? There's the social things. We've done happy hours. I know other groups have done happy hours for them, events. We've tried to avoid the different sort of quizzes because I think people are just sick of those. So it really does work. And, even in small conversations like, Canal and I have spoken before, and Cordelia as well, about what's going on in Macon and in parts of Wisconsin. Hopefully some of it will, I was able to help them tease out, well, could this be a story you pitch for another team? One benefit that I have is I spent most of my career outside the U.S., but I also was a reporter in the U.S. a long time ago, and I know some of the places where they're from. I have some background, and so I can connect with them on those levels, which again would have been much harder with 30 people. We have to look for Sarah said it better than I did, so she can say it again. But we have to look for the sort of, benefits and ways to sort of flip this on its head and really make the most out of it.
And I think you hit on two, Andres. Sorry, Liz. I think you hit on two, Andres, that need to create community within the interns, like outside of us. And I think that's something that I love here. Like I saw Nora tweeting that she had recorded, I think it was Cordelia on the podcast this week. And I was just like, it's so great to see that coming together. And I think that's another important community. And we tried to, I think we connected most of the interns in February so they could start talking and getting to know each other. And so I think you can ask them about that when they come on, but I think they were communicating when we were trying to figure out what we were going to do with the internship program. So they also had their own support community, which I think is really important. And I think about my own career, and some of the best connections I've had throughout the years have been folks I met when I was an intern who were fellow interns. And so that is another community that I find super valuable. And I'm happy that it's not just the 8 for the summer, but they're all connected, the 30 of them who will intern across the year. And I think that's a valuable piece of it too, is their own community.
What are some pitfalls or blind spots to look out for when putting together remote internships as distinct from traditional internships?
Expectations that mirror or match. So, this is my first class that I lead in. This is really because Sarah, Keiko, and Megan really worked incredibly hard to recruit these students and select them from an amazing class of students. But this is the first class I'm leading, and I think you would never want to compare a group of people anyway to the one before them. But even now, even less. That just doesn't make sense. So if you look at output and said, oh, well, it needs to be this, it needs to be that. First of all, they are actually producing as much or more as past classes. So that's pretty amazing. And it speaks to the fact that it can be done. But it requires a lot of work, and it requires a lot of patience and setting sort of milestones and guideposts. I've already figured out, with Sarah talking a little bit, some things that I would like to do differently, probably for the next class, which are maybe some more formal surveys to some of the managers, to some of the interns, just to gauge things. But already, we've seen the 8 students growing throughout these 5 or 6 weeks, trying new things, being challenged. That's the key thing. If you're seeing that, if you're seeing your interns challenged, trying things they've never done before, not necessarily always succeeding at it, but learning something from it, then you're doing it right. That's never going to change. But comparing and trying to say, these are the benchmarks, well, you don't know what the summer of news is going to be like, right? Somehow we were handed this weird, summer of lots of news. And they've all risen to the occasion and done a tremendous job. So I don't think you want to compare it like that. But pitfall-wise, it's communication, over-communicate. I've been saying this for years to young journalists. Email is the devil's work. Call people, but call with purpose. You can call it a chat, that's fine, but especially in your newsroom, just never wait for emails. It's and a lot of people hate me for saying that because they don't want to get random calls, but it's how you most effectively communicate if you can't be in person. So over communicate, have a purpose, make sure you know why you're talking to that person.
And I think to that point too, Andres, it's not just communicating about the work, but communicating about how you're doing. And that's the thing that I have worried the most about, and I continue to worry about, and I think these guys know it, is I worry that they're either overworked or underworked, right? Are they getting enough assignments? Are they doing the type of work that they find valuable and are interesting? But also, do we not have a sense of, actually, they got pulled onto 3 projects and there's not one central person who knows that. And Andres has been really great about trying to keep tabs on that to make sure we're not stretching them too thin. But I also, because I can't just wander by their desk as easily, I need to know how they're doing. And, are we asking too much of them, especially in this time? I don't know how you all feel on this call, but I'm at my capacity. I think we're all feeling that way in this moment because the coverage is so intense. Our lives are so intense. We're cooped up. We're not allowed to live in the same way. And so you throw on top of that an internship at the Wall Street Journal remotely where you can't meet people in person. That's a lot to ask. And so that's the thing that I worry about. And so I do hope they continue to communicate with us if it's not meeting those expectations. And I think that's something that like other internship coordinators should be try to be really, really attuned to. We have to be more empathetic than ever before.
And finally, what are best practices you've built in specifically for remote internships that would in fact enrich traditional internships when we return to them one day?
I think Andres's weekly check-ins and really formalizing that has been super critical. You know, my job in the past has entailed not just the internship program, but also all hiring and recruiting and career development for the newsroom. And I don't know that I was able to commit that same time to it. And so I think we're super, super fortunate at the Journal that we've been able to invest in this position to have Andres check in with them so regularly. And I hope that is something that really continues. That's been a huge boon, I think.
I want to thank both of you, Sarah and Andres. You both will return during the Part 3 Q&A. We're now going to hear from the interns. I'm now going to introduce our AAJA New York student rep, Serena Cho, who will be a senior at Yale in the fall and is managing editor of the Yale Daily News. Take it away, Serena. Thank you,
Guys,
Sarah and
thank
Andres.
you so much, Liz, Sarah, and Andres. So for this second part of the panel, I'm going to be chatting with this summer's Wall Street Journal interns and their mentor and senior editor, Mike Miller, about their experience with the remote internship. So we're very, very lucky today to have so many interns from so many different places across the country and from so many different desks joining us this evening. If you hover over each video, each panelist's video, you can see their name and the desk that they're working for. You can also refer to the Eventbrite link that's in the chat for more detailed bios of each of the interns. So just to introduce all the interns very briefly, we have Urim, who covers tech and is joining us from California. We have Cordelia, who works for the Life and Arts desk from Macon, Georgia. Elaine, who works for Wall Street Journal Pro from Chicago. Andrew, who is part of the graphics team from Brooklyn, New York. Nora, who's an audio journalist from Milwaukee. Kanala, who is working for the Wall Street Journal magazine, joining us also from Milwaukee. And lastly, Mike Miller, as I said, who is a senior editor, and he is representing the mentors tonight. So I want to start by asking about all of your decisions intern remotely this summer and to participate in this great but also uncertain experiment that's probably never happened before. So Sarah and Andres explained earlier that interns could decide to either delay their internships or do it remotely this summer, and they talked through the decision about the pros and cons with every one of you. So my first question is, what were some of the factors you considered in deciding to conduct your internship remotely rather than defer for a year? And what were some of the questions or concerns that you had about doing a remote internship before you guys started?
Hi, so I can start off with that. And thank you again so much for hosting this. So when I found out that I would have to make this decision, whether I should defer for a while or go ahead and take this opportunity now, I reached out to so many of like my past professors, other people who I see as like mentors within the journalism industry. And so many of them said that I should go ahead and defer for either until September or until January, just because they knew that I'm not going to get that same kind of in-person relationship building as I would have otherwise. However, for me, there are two main things. One, financially at the time, I don't know if I knew if my student loans would be frozen. Now they are because of COVID, but beforehand I was just like, I graduated from American University in December, and I would have to start paying those soon. And so I kind of wanted something steady to get income in some way so I could start paying those off. But also a huge part of my decision was my own professional growth. So it was just, is there any way that I could kind of use this opportunity to grow and become a better journalist? So that way, by the time it's over, I'll have a lot more other opportunities in the future. So.
Great.
I'm like similar to Cordelia, but kind of the reverse. I had reached out to all of my mentors, and they were, I was, at the time, I was kind of like, no, I'm gonna defer. And they were like, no, like, they all had this really serious hunch that we would not be going back to in-person working or offices anytime soon. And I'm so glad that they did. And so they were just like, Kanala, like, if you think you're going to be working in an office anytime soon, think again. And I was like, sure, like, you're right. And that was a really cool opportunity for me to look at the experience differently. And I'm a true believer in, like, you get opportunities for a specific time for a specific reason. And so just graduating from undergrad, I thought it was going to be the perfect opportunity for me to really get my feet wet in what this new world looks like, and do it at an amazing institution. So that was my reasoning for deciding.
Mm-hmm. Great. So as Sarah and Andres talked about earlier, getting a feel for the newsroom is also a huge part of the internship. So Nora, I wanted to ask you, how did you guys get to know the newsroom environment remotely? And are there any activities that you found particularly helpful in doing that?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, I mean, Andres and Sarah were amazing at coordinating a really robust transition into our first few weeks. And I think I personally, I can't speak for everyone, but I felt really supported. But personally, I put in a lot of work, and I try to do it, like Andres said, a couple calls a week now. But in those first few weeks, I really worked to schedule like as many calls as I could to get a sense of the newsroom, and obviously within my own team, and my team's pretty small. We have like 12 people on WSJ audio, but more vertically too, talking to people who have been in this organization for decades. And there's a lot of those people, which shows, it's a great newsroom to work in, but asking them, like, you've seen this, institution change over time. What can I learn from you? What should I be doing now? And that, I think, was the most instrumental thing in adapting, more seamlessly into the virtual internship.
Mm-hmm. Great. Mike, I also wanted to ask you, as a mentor, what were some of the things that you did to help your mentees get to know the newsroom environment better?
Sure. The mentor structure, I think, is new to the internship this summer. It's like an extra layer so that every intern had one sort of other go-to buddy in addition to the editor they were reporting to. So I don't know, in other summers, and when I was an intern myself some time ago, that might have seemed a little bit cumbersome. It's like, I've got my boss, I've got my mentors, it's a little bureaucratic. But I really could see that this was a great way to overcome, the essential crisis of this summer, which is that you're isolated and you need extra layers to combat that isolation. So, and of course, I'm isolated too. So this was like a real gift to me that I was on the phone with Cordelia once a week, who is not in my work day to day. So I got to look up from my rut and have an entirely new person to talk to and bounce ideas off of. It was really extremely helpful for me just to have that in the rhythm of my week. It was nice to have a conversation, I thought, that was not super structured, like, what's your lead, how's the reporting going, but just sort of like, hey, how's everything going? I could gossip a little bit about the newsroom, or like, oh, you talked to Andrea, she wrote an interesting book, you should read that book. Just the kind of thing that you could sort of approximate what it would be like if, like, I wandered by her desk and just chatted a little bit informally. So I really am impressed that Sarah and Andres thought about the importance of structuring something unstructured. Like in our current predicament, there is no unstructured, so you really need to build it. You need to like manage spontaneity in a crazy new way, and I feel like that's what this did nicely.
Mm-hmm. Great. So I also imagine, because as an intern, you're not just talking to your assigned mentor, but trying to reach out to as many people as possible during your summer. So Cordelia, I also wanted to ask you, I imagine obviously reaching out to other reporters and editors, the process of doing that is super different remotely, because you can't just like go up to their desk and ask to talk to them. So other than, you know, your scheduled sessions with Mike, how did you go about connecting with editors or reporters who you might not see at all during your remote experience?
Yeah, so let's see. So the first couple of weeks of the internship, I feel like I was filling in every little bit of space that I had on my calendar with just editors that I just found like their work was really interesting, or just other people that my editor would like recommend, like, hey, you should talk to this person or whatever. And so from there, it kind of was just like a chain reaction almost, because it was just like from I don't know, just from one person to the next, I was able to schedule all these virtual coffee talks, which I actually think is one of the things that I've really appreciated from this program, because before I briefly worked remotely for another organization in which I feel like Slack was like such a big thing. For my team, it's not. And so usually it's like when you have Slack, there's like just, for me, it kind of replicated a newsroom, that constant chatter always happening. But I've learned to really appreciate these virtual kinds of conversations that I'm like scheduling constantly with other people, because it really gives me the closest thing to like show my personality as well as my drive for what it is that I do. And through that way, I feel like I've been able to really get to know all these other people in the newsroom, like Mike being my mentor. It's absolutely amazing. Sometimes I feel like because of that unstructured structure that I have, sometimes personally, like I forget that I haven't met some of these people in person. So
great. Does anyone else want to jump in on how they, you know, built a relationship with their mentor or other journalists in the newsroom?
So in the San Francisco bureau, if it wasn't remote, normally every week there's like this, like all the staff, or the ones that are available and the ones who aren't busy with like breaking news projects or whatever, they go to like a bar right next to the bureau office called Harrington's. And so like during my first week, they scheduled like a Zoom Harrington's or whatever, where I got to sort of meet all the people in the bureau, which was pretty nice. The San Francisco bureau is pretty big, so not everyone was there, but it was still nice to see a lot of people.
Are there?
Harrington's.
Go ahead.
I went to Harrington's when I joined the Wall Street Journal in 1984, so that's a long tradition.
I also wanted to ask you guys, I imagine it's also, while it's important to connect with mentors and other, you know, professional journalists in the newsroom, I imagine it's also as important to get to know your fellow intern class. So how did you guys, what kind of activities did you guys conduct to get to know other interns who you may never see in real life?
Yeah, so we've actually had a few happy hours and meetings kind of outside of work. They're usually arranged by Nora. Yeah, so we just kind of get together and talk about like our highs and our lows and what we're working on, what we're excited about. Yeah, and we also just have like separate group chats. We have our own Slack channel where you can keep in touch and kind of, if people need help with the story, they can ask for sources and recommendations and just like general guidance. If some of us have like a subject area where we're more skilled at, we can kind of get that feedback from each other. So that's been really nice.
Mm-hmm. Great. I also wanted to ask you guys, I imagine this is super difficult when you're working remotely. How do you guys come up with pitches and deal with a situation where on-the-ground reporting is practically impossible.
I can jump in here. So in terms of how I come up with pitches, well, from the very beginning, I guess like a little tip of advice that's really helped me a lot during my time here is before the internship began, I came in with several pitches just because I was just like, one of these has to stick. Unfortunately for me, like a few of them have stuck. And they're stories that still apply. They're like a little more on the evergreen side. So that way, even now, like if I can brush up on that, I can always bring it back and work on that. But like during the internship process, I feel like I get a lot of my story ideas from social media, just reading stuff online, as well as I find some golden stories I get from just the conversations that I have with my friends. So if I'm just like virtual chatting with people, just calling people up on a video call, my friend will like say a funny story or like talk about something that they've experienced during this time. And then I'm just like, I can see a story there. And then it's just like talking it over with editors who might work in that area in order to really stitch it up into something really good.
Nora, I saw, oh, go ahead, Urim.
Oh, no worries. You can go if you.
Oh, no.
I guess I'll just start. Okay, so one other thing that like is like a potential source of pitches is like sometimes like senior editors like at the Wall Street Journal want something covered, but there isn't anyone who's available to cover it in your bureau or in your coverage area. So for example, like my first story was on Apple's WWDC and how virtual conferences, Apple's WWDC signaled that virtual conferences can work. It was a success or whatever. And that wasn't, I didn't pitch that. It was pitched by Jamie Heller, who's like the head of business coverage at the Journal. And no one was available to cover it, so you can just take it. And editors will always, especially good editors, and I'm sure you'll have good editors if you intern at the Wall Street Journal, they'll sort of offer you suggestions as to like what you can cover as well. So there isn't an enormous amount of pressure to create your own pitches all the time.
Great. Nora, did you also want to jump in?
I'd love to add the audio perspective too, because it's like particularly challenging to get audio when you're remote. Because like the lifeblood of what we do is going to a place and capturing the sound. And obviously the team is really thoughtful about how they send people out now and, you know, being very careful. But it's been a really, like to Sarah's point earlier, it's been a really exciting opportunity to try to do that because I think that you find ways around it. Like when I come up with a story, I sometimes can call the source, say it's like a restaurant. I can call the source and be like, hey, do you mind grabbing a voice memo of your restaurant ambient noise for like 10 seconds or a minute and send that to me? And you're still doing reporting. Sometimes you need a little more help from your sources. But I think like as a journalist, and one of the reasons I was excited about doing this remotely is because you're never going to be able to go to like every spot where you want to report. So it's a challenge to be like, how can I make the best story possible from, you know, my teeny room in Milwaukee.
Cool. So Elaine, I wanted to ask you specifically about the Wall Street Journal's training program, because at least from what I understand about Wall Street Journal Pro, it seemed, you know, it seemed to require a lot more technical knowledge than probably just like reporting a general assignment story or whatever. So I wanted to ask you about, you know, how that remote training experience has been for you.
Yeah, I also have like no technical knowledge, so it's so I was coming into this kind of scared too, but and the editors and other full-time reporters have been really helpful and supportive, so that's been kind of, I think, the driving factor of what's helping me get used to the coverage and things like that. Mm-hmm. But in terms of the training, a lot of it was covering like getting to know the newsroom, a lot of kind of standards and ethics, which I think was probably one of the most helpful parts that I've realized in reporting, and also just getting a good sense of what are the various like aspects of the newsroom that you would never know. So I think that would go back more towards your earlier question and what people have been talking about earlier in terms of how do you get a sense of a newsroom virtually if you're not there physically. I think that's what the training did most, to help you get as much of a sense of what the Wall Street Journal is like without ever seeing it in person. But in terms of like how it contributed to the current reporting I'm doing, again, I think they drilled into us really deeply standards and ethics. We had like, I think like maybe 4 hours of it, like a really long, like they really drilled it into us. But that was definitely, I would say, the most helpful part in some of the reporting I've done, because I think that that was really early on in the internship. And I think that they really thought about the fact that we need to train them in this really early on, because they're going to encounter like maybe ambiguous moments in their reporting, and like we should equip them with the knowledge to know how to handle that. So I think they were really thoughtful about that.
Mm-hmm. Andrew, I also wanted to ask you about your experience of doing your graphic design internship remotely. How is it different from, how you envision your internship to have been if it is in person, and what are some of the things or like initiatives that you have introduced or your editors have introduced that have been particularly helpful to your experience?
Yeah, so I think the main thing coming here was that there are a lot of internal graphic tools at the Wall Street Journal that we use. So in addition to using D3 and Illustrator, there are some kind of products that are just for the Wall Street Journal, just for the newsroom. They're constantly being updated. So it's really like important to be able to talk to your editors to kind of get an understanding of how to use these graphic tools correctly. And so, yeah, I've been working on a lot of COVID projects recently. I'm on the enterprise team, which covers life and arts and investigations. And so a lot of my graphics are kind of like long-term stories about COVID. And so I tend to kind of have to look for the type of visual that I think best fits the story or the data or context. So when we talk about pitching in a graphic sense, it's a little bit different than pitching like a written story, because we're typically pitching a graphic for something that's already being reported on by someone else. So we're trying to look for like something visual that will accompany their writing and not kind of jar or like compete with the story. And so what we usually do is we'll have like someone make up like what they think they want, like what kind of type of graphic they think they want for their story, and we'll say, but I think this works better. So we'll do like small multiples, or we'll do maybe something in Illustrator or a photo diagram, so it can kind of cross over into things outside of bar charts and line charts, and kind of get into some of the more advanced data visualization that you would see in a news story, like scrolly telling or waffle charts, just like doing fun things to kind of keep the readers engaged and finding new ways to present data visualizations.
Mm-hmm. Great. Kanala, I also wanted to ask you about the ways in which, you stay connected with your editor and like continue asking for feedback and updating them on the progress that you're making on your stories, especially because since you're working for the Wall Street Journal magazine, I'd imagine that you're working on more long-term and evergreen stories than those who are covering breaking news. Yeah.
For sure. So I think for me, it's really been a matter of just over communicating and checking in daily, and asking for feedback on like absolutely everything, especially since some assignments are like fewer and far in between. But it's been a really smooth process. And like one thing I've always tried to keep with me with all internships, but this one seemed really important, is just like checking in. So we're like through our halfway point. So checking in and saying like, hey, based off of the work I've done so far, what feedback do you have? What can I do better at? Where do you see any lacks? And that's been like really helpful just to start that dialogue. And then I was also lucky enough coming into the internship that our managing editor set up a meeting where I can meet with her daily. And that's a meeting where it's less, business and more so just like genuine check-in space. But that was something that like I didn't know I needed. And so that's also a space where, like, you know, we can just talk about something funny we saw on TV or the internet, or, you know, it can go from like, here's a concern I have about if I'm doing this assignment right, or, you know, I'm not sure the best way to communicate this because, you know, I think Cordelia spoke about this as well with Slack being this interesting space. Like one thing that was really hard for me to grasp at the beginning of the internship was understanding like what is different about virtual internships in terms of like the niceties and like, you know, do you need to show your face? Do you need to do this? Like which Slack channels should you really be talking in and which ones shouldn't you when you've been added to like 50? And so like that was a space where I was able to like ask those questions like, is this a space where I can just like say at here or can I not say at here? You know, because people don't talk about that. Like you're not supposed to say at here in Slack channels. Who knew? So granted, I didn't. But, you know, having those types of spaces with my editors on a daily basis was super helpful for me just to not only assess my assignments, but also to assess like the culture of the space that I wasn't really getting in person. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So my next question is for all the interns and also for Mike. What were the biggest unexpected challenges that you guys encountered this summer? In terms of doing a remote internship.
Okay, so this is something that I think is mentioned in my my story that I just wrote about remote internships, and something that I've talked to the other interns about like a few times. So I feel like I didn't expect sometimes feeling, well, I don't think I've been burnt out just yet, but there's like some times in which, because I'm at home, like in past internships that I've had, I'm the kind of person who, if the story is not done by the time it's time for me to clock out, I will stay until I can like finish it, until someone tells me to go home, and then I don't have to worry about it. But because I'm working from home, I don't have that person to tell me that anymore. So it's about being able to coordinate for myself, when am I working and when do I have to get off the clock? Otherwise, I will work for hours on end. And sometimes that stress creeps into my head during my dreams, because then I'll dream about the stories. And it can be pretty bad. So it's like being able to, and I guess another way of thinking about that is like lunch breaks. Like so often I'll want to work through lunch just because, I mean, why not? Let me just keep it going. But I've kind of learned to try to use that time to kind of give myself to recharge, even if it's just like 30 minutes just to eat something. Sometimes I use that time to call a friend, just so that way I know I'm not just gonna start typing on my computer some more stuff, and just trying to maintain that work-life balance is basically what I'm saying has been a bit of a challenge.
Does anyone else want to jump in?
You go
ahead. Okay. This has kind of been touched on already, but it was something I didn't realize that I was missing out on until I started getting into the internship, was like kind of how much I realized that a lot of the relationships with other people in the newsroom that I developed in past internships were through like what people were saying, just like chatting with people who sat next to you, or like just stopping by someone's desk and chatting. And I guess like that wasn't something I realized until getting in this environment and being like, wow, like that's something I'm really missing out on. And then so it kind of took me, and it's still taking me kind of to get into the mindset, because for some reason I feel like virtual communications are a lot more formal than, you know, just like stopping by someone's desk. But I've been trying to more get into the mindset of like, oh, like if you ask someone to like hop on the phone with you to chat, or like if you're sending them an email about something, like you can try to emulate the like stopping by their desk experience. And so for me, I just been having to try to like get into the mindset of like, oh, like if someone says that, you know, ask me questions, like don't be afraid to take them up on their offer. Act like it's like, try to think about it as if like, you know, you were just stopping by their desk. So that's what I've been trying to get my mindset into.
Cool. Kanala, did you also want to jump in?
No, lots of the same. I think one thing similar to Elaine, like stopping by people's desks was really important to me in my previous internships, especially because I'm one of those people that like I just love learning about like an entire organization. And so even though I'm with a magazine, like I might reach out to somebody in audio just to like be a fly on the wall for a day, or reach out to a department, you know, the copy desk, just to be just be a fly on the wall. So that's something that I've had to work towards and like really reach out to people, and like be open to like it. I think this is probably, it's not hard, but it's something it took me a minute to understand I had to do, was like negotiating with all these different people about, hey, I'm interested in this, can I do that, what does it look like, and having those separate meetings so it can happen versus just, you know, being in an office and saying like, is there anything else for me to do today, can I hop over here? You know, you really have to make sure everyone's on the same page, because there's so many people invested in our experience, which is awesome. I actually think it's really cool, but you know, for a week or two, it felt like, okay, maybe that just was something that wasn't going to happen, but that's not the case. It just takes a little extra effort and, you know, like we've all said, like over communication.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
So I don't have so I didn't experience this personally because I don't really have a frame of comparison because I don't have a prior journalism internship. One of my editors said that like one of the key things that I'm sort of missing out on is like that, like if you're in a newsroom, like you can listen to other people when they make phone calls, when they interview people, like how they ask questions. And apparently it's like like developing your own voice and like developing like strong interview skills requires listening to other people, like interview like important people or interview other people. So not having that chance by being in a physical newsroom is probably problematic.
Andrew, did you also want to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on that kind of learning who does what in the newsroom can be difficult, and trying to figure out what you don't know when you don't have your editor right next to you to kind of guide your hand can also leave you a bit frustrated. But in addition, I think there are some pros too to kind of having a remote internship, in that there are kind of less distractions working from home, and it's kind of easy to zone out and get into your work. You get things done. You find you get things done a lot more quickly.
Yeah, so as I think both Elaine and Kanala talked about, reaching out proactively to other journalists and your mentors is super important, especially when you're conducting your remote internship remotely. But I also think that one of the biggest concerns that many interns have is that they're scared of bothering their mentors or like other journalists too much or like too frequently. So Mike, I wanted to ask you about how interns can navigate that concern.
Well, I mean, I certainly understand it. I remember as an intern myself, feeling very introverted and, you know, anxious about bothering other people. What I learned and anyone else who's, you know, out there working in any kind of newsroom will, you know, agree with me, I'm sure. What I learned is it is really great if an intern reaches out to you. You are not being bothered. You know, in my summers at the Journal, when there's like a knock on the door or an email and it's one of the interns who wants to introduce themselves, that's a good thing. That's a pleasure. You know, not to like overstate it, but when somebody, you know, young and hungry comes and knocks on your door and introduces themselves, that isn't necessarily a burden. That's also like a fun blast of energy for those of us on the receiving end of it. So it is worth, you know, of course, as you all know, because you've come so far, you know, tone and style is everything. There's like a delightful way to knock on the door and an annoying way. And so you guys are all people who have mastered the delightful way. And it's just like anything else. If you send somebody an email or, you know, if you buy a coffee at Starbucks, you know, it can be a pleasurable experience for the person on the other end or not. And, you know, if you're the kind of person who makes it a pleasurable experience, it's a great thing. it does require, I mean, I just can't imagine how hard it is remotely, because when I was an intern, I was the lucky beneficiary of some people who looked after me and who saw the diffident, introverted intern, and kind of came and hang out with me and did all the heavy lifting and broke the ice. And, you know, that was my good luck. If I had to do it on myself, for myself, it would be like, you know, running with weights. It would be an extra significant burden that you guys all have. But it is worth remembering that, you know, you guys are a blast of fun energy, not a burden if you handle yourself properly.
Great. So I wanted to also ask you guys, are there any advantages of interning remotely, do you think? Or are there any, you know, new initiatives or projects that you guys introduced this summer that you think could be really effective if you continue doing it even during an in-person internship?
I think networking is, and maybe this says something about like, maybe I'm a robotic person, but I think networking is a lot easier now. I don't know why. I think there's a few reasons. One, when you have a busy editor, they can multitask while they're chatting with you. So as before, I think it's harder for like a US news editor to parse out a half hour for just like a face-to-face. But if you have a video call and something pops up on their Slack, they don't have to, like, they can tend to both things, which I know sounds a little bit impersonal, but I think that's been essential for me in being able to talk to some people I really wanted to in the newsroom, is they can squeeze me in throughout their day because it's easier to schedule things in chunks on your calendar. And I also just say, like, as Mike did, no one has been, has been standoffish when you reach out with those requests. I mean, even Matt Murray, the editor-in-chief, said, schedule some time with me. Like, everyone is bending over backwards. So I think if anything, it's just been easier to schedule and network throughout the summer.
One thing I would add too, and this is like more philosophical, I guess, but like a lot of people mentioned when we started, was like to extend grace to everyone. And so there is this, element of like, yes, everyone wants to talk to you, and like, yes, just send emails and don't worry about how it comes off. But there is this reality that like, it might get buried and they may not get back to you in a good amount of time or whatever. And so like, I just remember people repeating that during our training week often, and people who I spoke to outside the organization, just make sure that you're offering grace to people during this season, and like this element of not kind of overthinking what a person is viewing you as if they're not getting back to you in a good amount of time. And I think that's something that I would love to see, moving forward, just because I have been in internships maybe when I was younger where like I was super nervous that this one editor I really wanted to talk to wasn't getting back to me like week after week after week. And then when you finally meet them, like you realize it had nothing to do with you. So that's something that I think is really important to the entire process, that it's been like really good for me. And I think my self-esteem and how I view, I guess, the hierarchical like notion of the industry, like everyone is just trying their best.
Go ahead.
I think it makes remote work can also make a lot of financial sense if you're living in a very expensive area, or if your bureau is in a very expensive area. So I'm in the San Francisco bureau, and obviously living in downtown San Francisco is very expensive in terms of rent. So like I'm living in subsidized university housing, like in the South Bay instead. So it's much cheaper to do that rather than try to like get a place in San Francisco. So like if you, even in New York, I assume it's possible that it might be cheaper to do a remote internship. So.
So for the final question before we jump into Q&A, I wanted to ask every one of you for one piece of advice for people who are going through remote internships now or will do a remote internship in the fall, on how to, go through this experience successfully. So if we could just go around the Zoom room. Mike, maybe you can start.
I just loved Canalo's advice to to bring grace to it, I'm just going to totally co-sign that because it's helped me dealing with the whole crazy newsroom during this time, which is, you know, the elephant in the room that we're not talking about is this is a crazy, crazy, historic, horrible time. It's so hard. You guys are such heroes for being so professional despite the, you know, unimaginable constraints of being, you know, quarantined during a pandemic. I've never heard of such a thing. So I think it's good to just keep that perspective and keep the grace that you articulate so well, Kanal.
Great, Cordelia, do you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah, I feel like there's so many bits of advice, but I guess for me, something that's really helped me is just go into your internship with goals, have an idea of what it is that you want to get out of it by the time that you leave, and what ways that you want to grow. Because I feel like going in with that in mind, and like it's okay if you have to like change it as you go. Like maybe you talk to someone and they're inspiring and they want you to tap into something, whether that makes you want to tap into another side of the newsroom or something like that. Like you can shift as much as you want, but it really helps to have that end goal in mind, so that way you can really work towards that. And I don't know, I feel like you will feel a lot more satisfied afterwards.
Urim, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so I mean, I'd obviously echo the sentiment that, like, you know, you want to have goals for your remote internship. Also, I think, like, as Cordelia sort of mentioned before, it is important to set aside, like, you know, time that you definitely know you're going to work. So you want to make sure that you don't work outside those times if you can, because like part of the burden of being a remote intern is that it's easy to just think, oh, I'm at my desk. I'm at the desk where I usually work, so I might as well work now. And you might work beyond like the 40 hours or 37.5 hours that you normally work in a week. So it is. I think I would strongly recommend setting aside time to like relax and just rest outside of work.
Great, Elaine.
I also echo that sentiment of essentially taking care of yourself and making sure you're eating meals, which I don't do a lot, and also, I guess this is kind of like maybe more related to remote living and like isolation in general, but I think that like making sure that you're connecting with people just generally in your life, because I think like on top of like getting embedded in your work and like doing that all the time, it's easy to also lose connections with other people in your life. So making sure that you reserve time to rest, but also connect with people and outside of work, and making sure that you're taking care of yourself, your mental health and things like that.
Great, and Andrew?
I would say to take every one-on-one meeting because there will be so many people reaching out to you that aren't on your desk or our team, and maybe not even on the editorial side, but you'll still be learning something and building a new professional relationship. And it'll really help you kind of gauge the depth of your publication and all of the working and moving parts, since you aren't really there to see it all happen in person.
Kanala?
Yeah, so I think I agree with what Andrew just said, and like I guess to add on to that, for people who are more like me, sometimes I can get a little shy, and so I try to evaluate how many people I would be meeting and how many people I would be genuinely close to if I was in person. And I would say think about that and figure out what relationships you can really build. You know, take on all the meetings, but do also focus on like, who am I connecting with, who's outside of my immediate circle that I can like really forge a relationship with. That was something I had to learn after setting up a lot of meetings. And like spend some time with like your home life, kind of like what Elaine was saying. Like there is this like really difficult veil to maintain between your work life and your home life. So just make sure that you're centered, make sure that you're taking care of yourself in all these other ways. So if you do work over hours or something like that happens, you're not putting yourself in a more stressful or harmful situation. Like Mike said, we are in a pandemic. So you do need to make sure that your health mentally and physically is like up to par. And we are in this like super unique situation where we're at home of all places. So make it a sanctuary, even though you have to work in it, still, value it and take care of it and find the things that are going to keep you centered.
Great. Last but not least, Nora.
Yeah, well, you guys said everything I was thinking. I think the big key for me has also been, and we've written stories about this, but time seems so squishy right now that I think it's been very important for me to set aside time. I try to do it every day, but at least weekly, to reflect. And I wish I could say it was more emotional, but it's more like a work reflection, like think of my goals from the week and have I met those, and am I setting like the standards that I want to meet, and the weekly check-ins with mentors and with Andres has helped a lot. But I found that I'll forget the stories I worked on like 3 days ago. And so having that time to look back, and also feels good, like look back on the week and say like, hey, I filed this many audio segments, or I did this. It keeps you motivated, but it also keeps you, on track. So that's been a good thing. I try to fit in as much as possible.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. Cordelia, I think a couple minutes ago mentioned an article that she recently wrote about doing remote internships. You can find it in our chat. There's a link to it. Everyone go check it out. Now we're moving on to the third part of this panel, which is going to be a Q&A with the audience. So we're gonna invite back Sarah and Andres.
And here they are.
Yeah.
I'm actually gonna ask the first question because Richard asked us in the chat. So I'm gonna read it off for Richard real quick. I think he's still around. Richard says, I recruit and train interns for the Newsroom at New York Public Radio. We took pains to make sure our interns are properly supported and guided by staff. But the biggest challenge in terms of offering our interns the full Newsroom experience is the lack of just that. The remote work essentially means no newsroom environment. So the question is, what are some tips you can offer in the way of maximizing the intern's experience? And I'm going to direct this question first to Sarah to answer.
Sure. Yeah, I was trying to hit on this a little bit earlier because I think you have to think about what is the newsroom experience differently. It is not the casual bump into each other in the hallway, which I know I miss immensely, and I know the interns are missing out on that opportunity too. So it's thinking about what are the things that you can bring the interns into that maybe wouldn't have been as accessible otherwise. And I think time zones don't matter, physical location doesn't matter. So it actually is an opportunity to bring them into more things as we're all working remotely, right? It would be a very different situation if the interns were just remote and everyone else was in the office, but we're all dealing with this. And so I think it's maybe flipping the question on its head and to re-envision what the newsroom experience is. And that's going to be different for every single newsroom, but I think we're starting to learn that and getting a better sense of it, and we'll use that for ourselves going forward.
And I'll just quickly, we just have to sort of move away from that. We can't replicate it. You can't replicate people running into each other in the newsroom, running into each other at like the local deli or whatever. So we need to forget that, and we need to start thinking about what are the needs of the newsroom and how can we challenge the interns to rise to that. So in other words, assignments that they probably wouldn't have been doing before, well, they're gonna have to do them because we need people to work on those assignments. And so that's how you do it. I think you go into it with a lot of hope and a lot of energy, and you sort of see how it works. And if people rise to the challenge, and these 8 have.
Great. So the second question is from Alejandro Salgado. I think this one is also mostly for Sarah and Andres. So Alejandro asks, if remote internships prove to be an overall success, do you see it as a possibility to open remote internships in the future post-pandemic for out-of-state students?
I can start there, Andres. I mean, we've been talking about this a lot, about what is the future of the internship program and trying to figure out what we can take away from this that helps us overall. And I think, I think we're learning a lesson for the whole newsroom, right? As we're all scattered across the country and the world, frankly, there are advantages to having journalists on the ground in a lot of different places or from perspectives of a lot of different places. And I think that's been valuable. And I think you're seeing it in the work these interns are doing, actually. And it's informing what they're doing. Do I want our internship to go fully remote going forward? I mean, hopefully not. I hope we're back in a newsroom one day, and I do think it's a valuable experience to have people in a newsroom. I think I don't see our whole newsroom going, fully remote one day either. And so I think the interns, I want them to keep sort of in that same cultural experience of the newsroom. But I do see some, we mentioned earlier, I think Yoram mentioned that housing is expensive in some of the cities where we're majority located. And so maybe, we need to think of it on the flip side. Is there like a housing stipend to offset that if we're having them come into a major city? And that's something that I would like to explore more. And I know some other programs have done it. So it's a possibility. I think if you're thinking of it as an accessibility aspect, like can we offer this experience to more interns because of that? Then I think you've got to figure out why, and is that the right way to do it? But, Andres and I are talking about this constantly right now.
Yeah, I actually spent the morning writing about it to myself. So I think like Mike said, and Kanala as well, this idea that students, young professionals today, and this will sound hyperbolic, Mike said it a lot better without being hyperbolic. You're experiencing something as young professionals that no one on earth in a group across the world has experienced in about 100 years. Something so devastating, a pandemic that limited our lives, created economic destruction, led to a huge amount of deaths, and really sort of, look, it's an incredibly profound, sad, and traumatic period. And yet you are performing, all of you on this call. You are working at jobs, you're looking for jobs, you're out there hustling. No one alive, Mike, Sarah, all the people on this call who have a lot of experience, Liz, we've never had to live through this. We've been through recessions. Maybe some of us have had to, go on furloughs, things like that. We've never experienced what you guys are going through, an emotional sort of impact and trauma. You are so much better prepared than any of us are at that age. And use that to grow, use that to challenge yourself. Again, this sounds like I'm sort of blowing smoke up your asses and I'm being hyperbolic, but I'm not. It really, you are steps ahead of all of us at your age.
I have a question posed by Arajit Sen earlier. Give me 1 second. It is, Arajit wrote, given the fact that some of the WSJ interns were deferred to next summer, does that mean that there will be fewer spots for next year? How might we stand out in the selection process, particularly if we lost a summer internship this year, looking for different qualities in remote versus in-person internships?
So, I've talked about this before to other groups, and I'm just going to reemphasize the same thing. Again, what's happening right now is in the world is completely unprecedented. And what you need to do to make sure that you are qualified and sharp for an internship next summer is continue to develop those skills, right? So look for the jobs, be creative. It doesn't have to be in a newsroom. It doesn't have to be at a news TV station or radio station. Think about work that might be available, for example, if you can't get anything right now, through your college universities or libraries. The librarians there do amazing work. They're constantly looking for people to do transcriptions, work in foreign languages if you have foreign language skills, audio work, TV work, be as creative as possible. What we're going to be looking for, especially as people apply and they're going to be explaining, this is my story, this is who I am, these are who my skills, these are what my skills are, and this is why you should hire me next summer. We're going to be looking for, well, what did you do during the pandemic? And if you come to me and you tell me, look, I took care of my grandmother. My grandmother was sick. You did something. You showed me that you didn't stay at home and just sort of shut down. If you tell me, look, I went and got a job writing promotional copy for someone, and I learned actually quite a bit about my writing style, and it also exposed me to certain kind of reporting. It wasn't journalism, but it was reporting. Okay, there's a story there. Sell me what's going on, how you learned, how you grew, how you sort of rose above this challenge. You know, but don't come to us and tell us, well, I didn't do anything during the pandemic. You know, we all need to make money. We all need to live. You know, everyone is being challenged right now. Probably everyone on this call has a family member, a friend who's going through something with COVID and probably has had to rise to the occasion and help them out. If that's what you had to do this summer, well, yeah, that's pretty damn important.
Great. The next question is from Donnie Morrison. So the question is, even though the September internship is now remote, I'm still thinking of moving to LA where his internship is to be close to the action. How has it been reporting on a city you're not technically in? Do you find yourself wishing you were at least in the city or not, or are you not really bothered?
So can I answer this one? I actually did some field reporting. So I don't live in SF like directly because I live in the suburbs, right, in the South Bay. But like one of my editors offered me the opportunity to like do some field reporting in San Francisco to help out with another article about like rent prices in San Francisco falling as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. And so, yeah, they paid for my Uber ride there because they didn't want me to take public transport. And it was nice to do some field reporting. And so, yeah, I think it's definitely nice to be closer to the city in which your bureau, the city that you're sort of responsible for covering. Like technically as a tech person, like I'm not exactly responsible for covering San Francisco, but like generally the bureau is located close to like your coverage area, right? So like San Francisco is a tech hub. So like whenever you want to cover something about tech hubs, it's nice to be able to cover the city by being physically present. So I think it would be kind of helpful if it's safe to like move to, if it's safe and you have the financial resources to do so, to move to the city that you'd like to report on.
Great. So it's already 8:25, but we have so many great questions. We're gonna go until just 5 minutes extra until 8:35. So the next question is for the interns. It is what kind of goals have you all set for yourselves at your internship? One of the struggles with my remote internship has been gauging whether I'm getting the experiences I want.
Yeah, so, and I think I talked a little bit about just making sure that you set goals. So let's see. So I made like a checklist of a bunch of stuff that I want to do. Number one on the list is for me at the Wall Street Journal to write an A-head. That's like a really like a long, quirky feature like story, or like made up of so many different sources and things. So even though I'm able to do that, like with the stories that I typically report day to day, just there's something special about that. So that's something that I've always been thinking about, like pitching, talking to Mike about for ideas, etc. So that's something, but a little bit more broad, I guess. For me, I really wanted to try something that I haven't really gotten much experience on before. So like data journalism. And so now like, it's great because now like we're able, and a lot of the interns are able to work on a project with the investigative team. So building my skills there. I want to do something with the audio team. And now I was able to at least be featured, well, not be featured, but I spoke on one of the podcasts, which was really cool. Or like sourcing is something that I've really wanted to build just because I'm still so new to this industry. And yes, I have some sources, but I think, and maybe this is a question we'll get to later in terms of building those kinds of source relationships. That's something that I really want to work on doing. And after speaking with some of the people in the newsroom, they've given me tips about how to do that, even while we're working remotely, whether it's just like checking in with them occasionally, emailing them, etc. So that way I can build like a source list that's going to help me even after my internship ends. So those are just like a couple of the kinds of things that I've kind of set for myself as goals.
We have a question from Grace DeGraff. How have you all found the experience of having a mentor who is separate from other managers in the newsroom?
I know I liked it personally. I feel like having a mentor outside of the magazine has been nice because I spoke to this as well a little earlier, but you know, not knowing how to frame a question, you know, small things that you don't even think about, and then having someone to bounce that idea off of, having someone to bounce story ideas off of, and just getting this like completely outside opinion. That's been nice. And then also to hear about the stories she's working on and hearing like the way she's thinking through the story, thinking through sources. It's just been really nice, especially since I'm not like I'm virtually not in the newsroom. I'm in like the magazine newsroom. It's nice to feel like I have like a little like way to peer into what's happening over there.
We have so many great questions left, but I think one that we haven't really addressed in the past hour and a half is from Renata Geraldo. So Renata asks, how do you create trustworthy relationships with sources, like say analysts or mid-level managers that can give you the scoops if you're not able to meet them in person?
I made an effort for like bigger projects I'm working on to just call people as quickly as possible and have like an intro chat. And I think that just like in a lot of our sessions, they called it source hygiene, which I love that term. I've never heard that before, but I think that it's the same whether you're remote or in person. Most often you're not going to be meeting with your sources every week. You're going to be sending them a call. So I think it's a good practice in just keeping up with that source hygiene, even if it is remotely. I think it's probably the same, but I mean, Mike is more experienced and can speak to that.
Yeah, I think you make a good point, which is that a lot of journalists never do meet their sources, or even, you know, pre-pandemic weren't in the same room. And so the little touches like the follow-up note, the, the source hygiene or source sort of buffing, like the Hollywood agent who remembers to like send you a cute thing he read because he knows you like that baseball team, or and also the sort of footsie sharing of information with your source, you know, within the bounds of ethics, but, you know, hey, did you read so and so, or hey, I just heard this, you know, fun fact. You know, making sure your sources know you're a chatty, fun person to talk to, whose call they want to respond to. I think you're exactly right, Nora. All those are things that don't require face-to-face contact, and it's nice to have it, but that kind of relationship grooming and hygiene, you know, email and telephone are really well suited to, actually.
I also think, and this isn't all instances, but I think when talking with people for the first time or meeting with people for the first time, the environment that we're in is kind of a common icebreaker that I found. And it's a way that you can just naturally talk about something other than you're reporting on, to kind of just make things a little bit more personal. If they have like a sound in the background, you could be like, oh, what's that? And like warm up the conversation a bit before getting into what you're reporting on. So like kind of like on the topic of like, I guess like finding opportunity in the situation that we're in, it has been a nice way to just break the ice with people you're talking to for the first time.
Great. So thank you so much, everyone in the audience for attending, and also to all the panelists for joining us tonight. I'll pass it off to Frank now. You're muted, Frank.
I was too used to being muted. I was just saying thank you everyone for spending some time tonight and just sharing a lot of great insights. It was really awesome to hear from everyone at the Wall Street Journal and how you guys are making this experiment work. So I just want to thank everyone. Thank you, Mike, Cordelia, Urim, Elaine, Andrew, Kanala, Nora, Andres, Sarah, and especially Serena and Liz, who have worked really hard the past few weeks to put this event together for you guys. Before you guys all go, I wanted do one more quick announcement. I just want to share a few last resources for you guys. So I talked a little bit about AAJ in the very beginning. I want you guys to stay in touch if you found this panel useful. We just launched a new newsletter today. We're calling it Family Style. Everybody's welcome to sign up for our new newsletter that debuted today. And it's going to be a monthly newsletter. So make sure to sign up for that if you're interested. Join our book club. We have another great event coming up next week on July 24th with the author of a book called The Gutter Spread Guide to Prayer. And we have the author joining us next Friday for a discussion on his book there. And then obviously, I think I mentioned this in the earlier portion as well. We have a great convention the week of August 9th through 15th, the AAJA Visibility Festival. If you're interested in checking out what we're having planned there, we have a lot of social events. We have a lot of panels. I know Sarah was telling me that the Wall Street Journal is going to have a virtual expo hall there. So if you're interested in that, definitely visit aaj20.org and to see what other things we have planned for you guys as well. And if you want to visit that expo hall by the Wall Street Journal and talk to Sarah and Andres there as well. And finally, if you do support our mission, if you do want to become a member, join aaj.org/join, and you can see all our different membership options for professional members as well as students. So finally, I just want to thank everyone. Thank you guys for attending and listening to us tonight, and please have a good night, and we hope to talk to you guys soon. So thank you all. Have a good night. Thanks, everybody. Thank you. You guys were all great. You guys are all great. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Serena and Liz and Frank. That was great.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Recording.
Yeah, we'll make sure to show. Oh, I should pause that recording now too.